Well, to be honest, man, it's been more than 2 months since we did some melee tier list for the raid. Yes, it's been a long ass
Was it
time.
last year?
I think it was last year, and it was during progression. And you can bet your sweet tooth this is going to be a totally different tier list than what we had way long back.
Or at least some of the specs.
Well, listen, if you're gonna look at the logs, because that's the best place you can look at to get an idea, there's a lot of situational stuff that can influence this. And we are looking at Mythic, okay? So this is the Mythic logs. So far, a lot of guilds have cleared and killed Razaket. Some of them are still progressing, but overall looking at the best of the best. And you have to stick out up to the end because we have a couple of more clarifications.
For sure.
This is the thing. It's about melees in raids where melees need to like. It's a rough time being a melee in the raid, and you can see when you see those 100% parses for some of these players, it's a wonder.
It's a struggle, you know, that the person has learned their stuff.
Yeah. As opposed to me when I look at my logs during our raid, especially last night when we progressed on Sandrat. And listen, we want to get that spider down so badly. So whenever I feel like something is like amiss in my performance, I just click on the Warcraft Logs companion app, look at my logs, and at the last pull, I have been very ashamed to say that my between the eyes count is not where it should be. This is one of the things that you can improve for your spec. And also, as an Outlaw Rogue, with the changes, sometimes I feel energy starved, because it happens. And obviously, there's an issue here as well. Looking at the Blade Rush usage is not that bad, but still can be improved. Everybody can do this, right? You can just download your Warcraft Logs companion app. You have it in-game. You open it up. It's easy to use while you're in the raid or while in your Mythic Plus run or whatever, and you can see either what other players do or how you can improve. All right, so thank you Warcraft Logs for sponsoring the video. If you want to help us, just download the link from the description
or click the link.
Easy. It's easy. Okay, let's start it off with Arms Warrior. What about Arms, Flame?
Well, Arms has been buffed by quite a bit, so I don't know where it was last time. It was probably pretty low, but now Arms is killing it on the meters, and Arms is one of the specs you really want for the raid because it brings the exact stuff that you want for the raid. If there's an ad phase, if the boss, let's say you're playing DR9, you want to be on ad, you pick Bladestorm and Merciless Bonegrinder and you explode stuff. If you want execute, Arms is back, baby. Arms has the best execute in the game numbers wise. Statistically right now, it's fun to see.
Yeah, it's 100%. Like with the vitality and the execute windows on Brassiget and the bosses that have longer periods of time, and the execute rate is just melting. So we have to say, although it has been not doing so well in the past, Arms Warrior is 100% an S tier for the raid. And yes, this is due to the buffs and whatnot. It also has AoE damage, but that execute cannot be ignored.
It's so good, man. I guess Arms are happy everywhere.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about Assassination Rogue. Another, I would say, star of the raid, although at the beginning of progression, you would see a lot more Assassination Rogues on fights like Teros and Braziget and so on and so forth. I guess you can call it maybe a budget Arms because it's still an execute spec due to Zoldyck. That's very potent, I would say, in a couple of fights. And it is like, in terms of like comparing it to the other role spec, it is the best single target role spec. However, the raid doesn't, I mean, it only has one pure single target fight, right?
It only have single target. And as Arms, it does have like the more generic build where you can also use it to deal big execute, like one of the best. If you don't have an Arms in your group, you're probably going to be top at executes, or at least very close to there as well. And the AoE is really good, not to mention as all the rogue stuff.
Yeah. It's it can play, being an assassination, obviously it can go with 3 poisons over there, not to mention the atrophic poison, which is very helpful indeed for all the tanks in the world. But it has to compete with some other specs, so it's not S tier, but A tier still. Very good.
It was very close for this to make it into S tier.
Yeah. All right. Now let's talk about Outlaw Rogues, and I guess it's to no surprise for anyone at this point that Outlaw Rogues are like dominating in most of the game avenues, probably less in PvP, but let's not get into that. you can still have, so I think the most beneficial thing for Outlaw is that they don't really have to change much for their rotation or their talent builds necessarily. Maybe some 1-pointers or 2-pointers here and there, but they do massive AoE and cleave and massive single target as well. This is the thing, because the nature of the raid is so that it has a lot of cleave and a lot of AoE, pure single target fights only on Teros, and you can see them still over there shining as well.
Pretty good, pretty good.
This is like maybe as opposed to Assassination, where it does have a good AoE damage, but when it comes to like that pure cleave, just Outlaw just takes the cake. So in this regard, we have to place Outlaw in an S tier.
It is. Statistically, it's one of the best melee specs in the game. It's also very tanky, even though it took a hit to what is it, combat stamina.
Yeah,
it's still like
that was that. Listen, so the thing about that really hasn't affected anything, because for the longest time, Outlaw Rogue stacks on versatility. The survivability of Outlaw is due to its focus on having the loads bunch of versatility. So them nerfing the stamina is like, why would you do that? That's
and I would know. I'm a healer.
Yeah, whatever. Let's talk about survival hunters, man. What are we looking at here? Is this like the best spec ever for Vault of the Incarnate?
Well, if you have been on our streams in the last couple of weeks and you've seen us play survival in raids, but also in dungeons as well, you will know that it's an ongoing project in us trying to figure out exactly what is going on with survival, because nobody knows what's going on with survival. So survival, okay, let's put a couple of positives out there. It does excel at single target. It can deal really high single target. Still not as high as the top specs in the game, but that's probably where survival's appeal kind of stops. Its AoE is very lackluster. You're likely never really going to build towards AoE in raids unless you just want to parse for big AoE fights. Its survivability is probably one of the worst in the games right now. It rivals Red, and it's probably even worse. Every single individual defensive that survival has is worse than Red, and we all know that Red is not a very tanky melee. It has a little bit of extra mobility when you put it in front of like some other melee specs, but it cannot compensate. And the fact that its overall design is so poor, where you have 2 DPS cooldowns and you never want to use them at the same time, is just really weird. And I think survival right now, and even with all of that, the damage is way lower than pretty much everybody else. So statistically, it's the worst melee spec in the game.
Okay, this is an F tier. We don't even have a D tier in this tier list. This is how bad survival is currently in the raid.
I've seen no improvements in the last 2 months.
But yeah, just look at the logs, Bernard. This is not biased. This is not what we think. It's basically what the logs are showing.
I think also survival is the only melee that hasn't cleared Razageth, or I think there was like only 1 survival that cleared Razageth.
Because probably the main hunters will go for BM and MM to have a better time with it. Definitely. Okay. But yeah, F tier. All right, now it's time for the Enhancement Shaman, which right off the bat you can talk about giga single target damage and cleave. I mean, if it goes well, it's amazing. I would say like the path, the progress of Enhancement, I think was kind of steady on. We're kind of expecting from the very beginning of the season for survival to be I'm thinking about it. Enhancement to be like on the path to glory, and it still retains a very strong position. I don't know if like. Obviously, I love playing with an enhancement because, you know, that attack speed, you know, very useful, you know, Wind Fury and stuff.
Wind Fury is actually a real increase, especially now with the resurgence of arms. It's actually a real increase in the DPS of certain melees in. And it does assure a spot of an enhancement, especially if you have a couple of melees that are really good at what they do. Enhancement's defensive kit is also really good as a shaman. It doesn't really have a lot of things going against it, except for the fact that it's actually probably one of the most complicated and maybe difficult specs to pull off properly with the way its rotation and all of that stuff goes on.
Yeah, but very few negatives. Indeed, many buttons to press, and you have to know exactly how and when to react. I guess we can make it a safe A tier for the raid so far, okay? Now, let's talk about the Feral Druids.
Achilles.
And listen, we've seen some logs, and Jesus Christ, some damage on AoE. God damn.
It's really good Feral. So overall, the output, the DPS output is pretty high no matter what you do. It does seem to favor AoE a little bit more than single target, as opposed to probably what we would have known from Feral in the past.
Yeah, you kind of expect the Feral to be blasting in single target. It's not ignorable, don't get me wrong, but when you compare it to some other S tier specs and A tier specs, it kind of falls short. But AoE, it's just bonkers,
It's
man.
good, it's good. It has a lot of things going for it. It's obviously one of the tankier DPS specs with the caveat that in order to be tanky, you kind of have to shift into bear. That takes you out of being able to actually do damage. You can survive probably better than other DPS specs because of that, but you have to stop doing damage, which is not something that you really want when you're pushing like a high-end phase, the timer is short and you want to get that shield from Razageth down and you only have a couple of seconds, you cannot shift into bear.
Yeah, it's still above average. Obviously, it cannot really compete with like the execute damage from arms, but I guess above average means it's gonna be on B tier. Again, logs kind of like point this as well, so not biased, all right? It's just we love Feral. It's just the performance so far in the Mythic raid. Now let's talk about Frost DK.
Frost DKs
decent,
are
maybe below average, I would say.
Yeah, it's a little bit below average, probably not because of damage, right? The damage is there, but probably because of its overall design, and that you'll most likely always want breath in raids. And we all have talked about breath for years. It's a very restrictive cooldown where you need to have that uptime on the boss. There are a couple of good things going for Frost DK. The fact that it is a DK and you do have, you know, the magical immunes, the AMZs, and the grips.
Yeah.
Also, a problem with all of these is that they kind of you don't want to really press them while you're in breath. Except for AMS if you want to cheese it and get some extra runic power. But outside of that, it's everything that Frost DK can be done good is probably when you don't want to deal damage, and there's no real situation where you want to do that, so it's just a little bit weird. It's kind of like Feral in a way.
Yeah. Plus you have to remember, like, Frost DKs is one of the slowest specs in the game, and did you see the Razageth platforms? That can be quite frustrating for a Frost DK, especially with the breath build. Not to mention, you also have to compete with like the Unholy that night, which has a lot more going for it. We'll get to it in a second.
For sure.
But so far, I would say a fair placement would be C tier.
It deserves a little bit of love, but mostly in the terms of design, because I can feel the frustration of Frost DKs having to play breath for the 4th expansion in a row.
All right, now let's talk about Fury Warrior, and I guess Fury Warriors are doing a lot better. They were on the top spot before the arms buff, so this is gonna be interesting to place. I guess Fury Warrior is like much more versatile. It's like that consistent damage all throughout.
Yeah. It's a more simple rotation, maybe a little bit less restrictive than arms, where arms has to like cater to specific mechanics and its playstyle. Fury just goes. You just press the gas and you never stop until the boss is dead or you're dead. Probably Fury is also slightly tankier than arms, since arms is probably its biggest competitor with the innate healing that you have, with Bloodthirst and Enraged Regeneration and all of that stuff. But I mean, you can probably see where it lacks, even behind specs like Assassination, where execute phases are starting to get more and more important as you progress higher into the raid, where you need that boss to go down as quickly as possible, and that's probably where you want the most amount of damage. So probably that's what's keeping Fury from like kicking it with the biggest of the boys.
Again, because arms has the fatality thing going for it. I mean, we still gonna talk about an execute because it's a warrior, so it has, but it has execute, but Fury just doesn't have the same value of it. Even when compared to like Zoldyx from Rogue, it's a little bit behind it, so it's still an A tier, I would say.
Yeah, it's still pretty good. It does good damage almost in all situations.
Yeah, okay, we keep it into A tier. This is so different than our last tier list for melees in the raid. Jesus Christ. All right, let's talk about the Havoc Demon Hunter. Guys, this is one of the best melees in the raids, hands down.
It is, but so I've been talking with some Havoc. We've been talking with our boy Lego as well. It does have one of the most punishing playstyles with the momentum, where it's momentum is kind of seeing the best amount of numbers.
It is.
But it is probably statistically the tankiest melee in the game, which is very helpful for healers. And I can speak from my experience. That means that you can survive a lot of mechanics. You can stay on the boss a little bit more. You don't have to like wait a little bit to be healed. You don't need to pop your immune, which is, you know, another benefit from Havoc, that you can just immune mechanics and stuff like that, plus you're mobile. Yeah,
exactly. And if you look at the logs, you're gonna see like Havoc really excels in the mythic fight on Razageth. And it's like, you know, one of the specs you really want to bring onto their raid, and also you still have like all of the cool things the Demon Hunter has. Like the mobility is super nice, and it can be very punishing when you're playing momentum. I guess you can talk about the nerfs it received, but it doesn't really impact its performance so far. It's still, I would say, one of the best melees in the raid. S tier material, baby. Let's go. It is what it is, boys and gals.
It's a much better Fury with no actual real execute damage profile, but it does pretty much everything. And you probably want a Havoc more than another Fury, let's say.
All right, let's talk about Red Paladin.
The hype.
Red Paladin is going to receive a rework in 10.8.7, but we're talking about the present and current Red Paladin in the raid. And okay, we all know that Red Paladin still has one of the biggest bursts in the game. More catered to, I would say, AoE than single target. It's still good in single target, but where it definitely shines is AoE. And you can definitely see them really shine on fights where there's multiple incredible, many more ads than your average Teros fight. You're not going to see Red Paladins shine that much on Teros.
There've been some really good Red Paladins on Bloodkeeper Diurna, which is the second to last boss, on Mythic, of course, and that's like a key boss to unlock, you know, getting all the way to Razageth, and they're doing pretty well, surprisingly, as opposed to other specs that specializes in pure AoE, like, let's say, Windwalkers. Red can still take a lot of that damage and put it into Razageth in the second phase, where you're like close to getting her down and you need that single target damage a lot. Plus, although we joke, and it's not really a joke, Bubble also offers you Paladins a unique effect where you don't use it for your defenses, but you can like offset mechanics. You can sit on the boss a little bit longer than other specs, because as opposed to other immunes like Havocs and Hunters, you can do damage in Bubble, and that's a big thing.
Yeah, this is the thing. When you look at the highest ranked players in the Mythic raid, they're not going to use that bubble defensively. That's you mainly used to like squeeze whatever you can to deal more damage and finish that fight without wiping. So it isn't no surprise. Now, in terms of like the overall performance and comparing the logs to the other specs, it's not the greatest performer, although you can see it in front of Frost DK, still a C tier. I would say this is, when you look at like Mythic Plus, it's doing, traditionally this Reds were doing better in Raise than Mythic Plus, but now it's like C tier.
It's okay. So what C tier means, it's like Frost DK probably has a little bit more damage than Red, but Red doesn't have the weaknesses of Breath of Sindragosa. Plus,
more uptime.
Red can pretty much do damage even outside wings way more than Frost DKs.
That's the story. Okay. Subtlety Rogue.
Hey, what's this guy doing?
Yeah, Subtlety Rogue.
Subtlety?
I mean, come on, man. We've seen the logs. We've seen. I mean, as much as we were kind of expecting for Outlaw to dominate all over the place, which in some capacity it still does. Subtlety just took the cake out of everything.
It's been pumping.
Yeah, it's number one in like all of the, like, if you compare all of the logs for the melees and between the rogues as well, you're gonna see a lot of Subtlety being number one. And when talking about
the best melee on Razageth, by the way, at the moment,
was gonna get to that. So you can see it being the best melee in for Razageth. Not only did Subtlety still retain its funnel and priority damage, you know, single target blasting, but when it comes to uncapped AoE, especially in the phase where you have the little mobs, you know, moving for one side to the other, and you catch those little bastards.
Oh, you need to catch him.
Dude, it's massive, and this is why it's one of the best. It can definitely help out on killing those very, very fast. Not to mention all of the other things it has going for it. So great funnel, great single target. Not the best cleave, but it's not as worst as in the past. I guess cleave is like the only place where you would see Outlaw be better than Sub, but that's very, very niche. So at this point in time, boys and gals, Subtlety Rogue is numero uno.
This, once again, the return of the king. It has seen the light once more.
It's not a paladin seeing the light, but if he's playing with a paladin, it's definitely going to see some light over there. Yeah, I think it's well deserved. Subtlety is a great spec to play, and it's fun. Once you master it, it's very rewarding. Number one, let's talk about Unholy DK.
Unholy DK, this is a very, very difficult spec to rank. We've been looking at performance for Unholy on a lot of the bosses, and it's really hard because Unholy has some of the best single target damage in the raids, and boss damage specifically. Unholy is clearly, at least at the point of recording this, the best spec to receive power infusion from priests. And you know you're gonna have at least like one priest every now and again, and you will want to put your power infusion on your Unholy DKs. They receive the most amount of buffs. It definitely helps. It is a little bit difficult to mesh with all of the pets and keeping up them on the pets, and pets can sometimes bug and okay, but it does pretty much everything as a DK. The Frost does with like no downsides. You don't lose anything by popping an AMZ or anything like that every now and again. And it's
100% one of the specs that can shine in pure single target. You've seen a lot of good logs on Teros. You can definitely see a lot of good logs on Sandrat as well. This is the main differentiator, I would say, because being able to like either go for the wound build or the epidemic build, you have a lot of wounds and diseases ticking, and you're not restricted to having apply, you know, Breath of Synagosa 100% to be able to pump that damage. Not to mention, you know, the value it gets for army with a power infusion and everything in between. It just makes it a very competitive spec. But this is the thing, right? It's competitive to when you're talking about some bosses, some fights. On the overall spectrum, it's not as great. It's above average, I would say, maybe close to feral in a lot of the scenarios. But like taking all of the logs currently and looking at, you know, okay, Unholy DK versus Assassination, Fury, Enhancement, Outlaw, Havoc, it's below those specs, and I guess a fair placement would be B tier.
It would be a good place to be in B. Beers where probably most melee specs should be, as in, you know, they're doing one or two things really good, and they might have like a weakness, which is fair. And everything above is like just overwhelming a really good design. So maybe we can see a little bit of love to B and below.
All right. Now let's get into the
other B spec.
Arguably the highest AoE damage performer in all of the melees. Obviously, we're talking about Windwalker Monk. Again, guys, since the raid is like primarily built up with many mobs and trash and whatever, you're gonna have to see a Windwalker Monk. Now, this is not saying that, you know, single target is the weakest. I guess it's weaker than the others.
The thing,
yeah, it's weaker than the others, but you cannot say like as in the past you would talk about Windwalker, oh my god, single target is shit. It's not shit, but it's lower than the other specs on the spectrum. Now that being said, it has one of the best mobilities, if not the best mobility in the game. Obviously, you have, you know, Sky Reach, you know, the teleport thingy. Not to mention the roll, the dragon flying all over the place. It can have a lot of great uptime, but I think the most value is the AoE damage, the best there is. So,
not to mention that with the Mystic Touch, this is probably one of the best times you can appreciate Mystic Touch, considering that the top 3 melees, even Havoc to an extent, in the game have a lot of physical damage into their kit, so obviously Mystic Touch is probably gonna have more value now than ever.
Yeah, and it is still a melee meta, heavy melee meta in the raids as well as in Mythic Plus, so by no surprise you're gonna have that Mystic Touch be super valuable as well. So, not S material, but I guess it deserves its place in S tier and A tier, not S tier. And this is the final image. This is, again, based on what we've looked at, all of the logs, you know, getting into the details and stuff. It's, I would say, we're kind of past the midpoint in the season. So,
for sure. Considering that we're past the midpoint, I don't know if we've ever had so many specs in S and A tier combined, where more than half of the DPS are doing amazing in raid altogether. If you look at the amount of specs that you see right now, and sure, some of them might need some help, but it is how it is at the moment. And yeah, I know, listen, tier lists are always subject to, you know, point of view and context and everything like that. Things can change. If you look at like all sorts of websites, you'll see like totally different things.
Yeah, this is the thing. And one interesting comparison is if you look at the heroic logs, this is like it flips upside down, more or less, right? So it's a very difficult thing to like pinpoint each spec and rank it accordingly. But I think one good place to start is to look at like the biggest raid comps, and if you see, you know, a mandatory sub-rogue, a mandatory arms warrior, mandatory Havoc Demon Hunter, Enhancement Windwalker, you're definitely gonna expect for those to be like super high up there, right?
For sure.
So yeah.
And you can also go to sub creation, where you'll see like half of the specs being F tier, probably because they're just not played. So all in all, this is how we look at the meta when we try to like rank different kind of specs. And sure, it can change, and seeing the amounts of buffs that are coming and more planned in the future. I'm looking at you, Red Paladins. Who knows how things will shape up in the future?
Yeah, it's gonna change for sure. And one more thing, out of all of these specs, I think Survival may be the only one who hasn't cleared Reza yet. Other than that, all of these melees have cleared Razagate on Mythic. So we cannot play some like all in F tier. I guess one considerable factor would be to at least clear Razagate to be somewhat viable. And if you did, then this is the place. We're just gonna look at the overall performance. And that being said, thank you Patriots for supporting
Appreciate
the content. Always love you guys. Check the link in the description if you want to join the family that way. And last but not least, Warcraft Log's companion app. It's the best tool you can have within the game to get yourself better and help your guild finally achieve that CE.
Get those blade rushes up.
Alright, thanks for watching the video. Have a great weekend, everybody. Bye!
I've been loving it then, I still love it now. Still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. Getting better every day, let me show you how. Cause still, I play WoW. Still, I play WoW. It's getting harder to stay, but at the end of the day, it's a guilty pleasure, so just log in and play. Whether it's classic or retail, I'ma do a /bow. Still, I play WoW.